Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar with Expedient and KSM Consulting, Making Your Data Center Selection. We appreciate you taking the time to talk through this with us. As we go through the webinar, please feel free to ask questions in the chat box through WebEx, and we will respond to those at the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and get started. So we have two speakers with us today, Ryan Gould, the Director of Business Technology at KSM Consulting, and Doug Thies, the Director of Market Strategy for Expedient. And KSM Consulting and Expedient work together to help a number of organizations migrate their data centers and make the right choices in terms of creating, secure and backed up environments in that sense. So what we're going to do today is have them talk through some of the whens, whys, hows, and help everyone understand the decision and how to make a successful move. And with that, I will hand it over to Ryan Gould to get us started.
Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today. We're tackling the topic of data centers like MCG had said. With me today, I've got special guest Doug from Expedient. He's going to help me demystify the data center. We decided to tackle this webinar in a partnership for a lot of reasons. But from my end, what we do kind of as a core group is build and plan strategies around data centers and then execute the work. We use partners all around the world to do this, but the favorite that we by far is the Expedient crew. So Doug's been a strategic voice in the industry for a while, and his wisdom and expertise in this conversation made a ton of sense to me. So I'll let him introduce himself here quickly, and then we'll kind of get onto the agenda for today.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm Doug Thies, Director of Market Strategy for Expedient. I've been in the IT space for about 35 years now, and really enjoy talking to clients about driving uptime and doing better work for their end users with IT. So happy to be working with KSM Consulting on a variety of projects and on this webinar as well.
Yeah, agreed. I think the relationships that we've fostered has been pretty great. The Expedient folks and our folks kind of share a common set of values around kind of fearless problem solving and client focus that just ends up in a great experience for the folks we do work with. For the agenda today, we want to kind of clarify what a data center is, just to make sure everybody's talking about the same thing. I've heard a lot of different iterations or variations of what a data center is, so we want to kind of sum up what that means and relate it to your business. We want to talk about when and why you would move a data center. Why would you ever do such a thing? So we'll talk about that a little bit. We put together a little readiness kind of checklist for you to start thinking about to make sure that you're planning in the right ways. Doug will talk about some of the selection criteria that's important when you're making your decision on a data center, and we'll talk about how to kind of bring it all together. We also have a good client story at the end that we'll kind of share, so it'll hopefully bring it all together for everybody. Let's start with the what is a data center piece. By definition, right, it's a facility that centralizes an organization's IT operations and their equipment, as well as where it stores, manages, and distributes its data, right? Data centers house the network's most critical systems and are vital to the continuity of daily operations. Well, that sounds scary, and so let me simplify that. A data center, simply put, is any closet. It's any server room, any cloud. I've seen people put it in their bathroom. Anything that houses your server, your network, and your business applications, right? Anything like that in your organization is considered a data center. Why am I telling you this? Because it applies to you. Most people hear the word data center, they don't understand what it means. They don't realize that it means them. Anybody that houses any kind of these systems houses a data center in one shape or fashion. Even the cloud, right? When people talk about the cloud is just a collection of data centers that's not local to where you are. Data center is the heart of just about anything technology. So when and why would you ever move it? I'm gonna let Doug talk about this. This is kind of where his team shines. They move data centers for clients every day, all day, every day. So Doug, why would someone want to move their data center, and when's a good indicator for that?
There's a lot of change events that really precipitate the move of a data center, and that's how we think of it. We think in terms of change events. We've got a list up here on screen. I'm going to go through some of the details on this and some others as well. The first one, infrastructure end of life or hardware refresh. Most companies who are owning and operating server equipment, storage equipment, network equipment, and data protection equipment have to replace that equipment at some point in time. Some wait longer than others. I've walked into data centers that look more like an IT museum than they do a modern data center, but in general, applications these days expect relatively new equipment, and that life cycle is usually 3 to 5 years with most of the companies we talk to. So the decision often is made when the hardware is out of date. Does it make sense for us to buy new equipment and then move the data center at the same time? There's some advantages to doing that, in that you can install new hardware in the destination data center and maybe make the migration a little bit easier.
Do you think that there's been some IT debt over the past kind of decade around this topic?
Oh my gosh, I think we'll probably talk about that a little bit more later, but the sins of the past that end up getting discovered when a data center gets moved are often profound. Hard-coded IP addresses are just the starting point. So yeah, it happens all the time. I'd say the next one, the business risks have changed. A lot of companies we're talking to now are having to consider issues with their client or their vendors asking for a better risk profile. The industry, if you're in manufacturing, for instance, your industry may not be particularly regulated by a set of governing compliance rules. However, your vendors and your clients may expect you to adhere to the same rules that they have to adhere to. So oftentimes it's not necessarily the government or an industry that's driving business risk change at your clients or vendors. New line of business, common time that people are moving their data center. They've found a new place where they think they can be profitable, so they add a line of business, and that may outstrip their existing data center, their existing hardware, so they may consider at the same time a data center move. A leadership change is also one of the most common places, and you ask, is that a business risk? Well, they may identify risk that the prior regime has not identified. So a CEO or a new CIO could easily be the precipitating event for a data center move.
We're also seeing, I think, kind of the next generation of leadership kind of come up into the ranks, where some of the legacy leaders are kind of stepping out a little bit, who are less technology focused, and the newer leaders are coming up and grew up with the stuff. So we're seeing them kind of want to dive deeply into technology and add it to how they run their business.
Very, very true. Changes in business size, mergers and acquisitions drive a lot of change. If a company's gobbling up other companies, it's easy to outstrip an existing data center. The mop closet you described, that's the data center of many small businesses. There's only so much room in there,
right,
and there's only so much cooling. So adding servers or adding capacity can make them consider a move. Spin-offs, same way, it may be a shrinkage instead of a growing, and moving, actually the company moving headquarters or wherever that data center is located, whether it's headquarters or one of the remote locations. If the real estate needs have changed for the company, whether it's growing or shrinking, they oftentimes use that event to move the data center into a co-location facility. So, another interesting driver on this, on change in business size, today it's hard to hire IT professionals. Mm-hmm. We're seeing, especially in this market, a real lack of availability for infrastructure people. So the idea of staff hiring issues may be driving a move to a data center, so there's less attention that has to be paid to the critical infrastructure, right, by by the IT staff is another driver.
I'm seeing a lot of demands out in the market as well for, leaderships are saying, hey, we want to focus on what we're really great at too. Yes, we don't want to do this anymore. We're not in the business of running a data center. Please someone else take this from us and let us focus on what we're great at. So we're seeing a lot of that demand, I think, as well.
Yeah, I've heard it called core or chore.
Yeah.
If it's a chore, outsource it. If it's core to your business, stay with it. The next category, investment, capital versus operating expense. Lots of companies now, even capital-rich companies who've always bought equipment, are considering the benefits of a flatter spend with an operating model for payment. And oftentimes, the operating expense model makes it easier to attach IT projects to the broader business initiatives. It's easier to say, okay, we spent $20,000 because we have a new line of business, rather than kind of the black hole of IT that often happened before. Also, another investment issue, sometimes budget just gets approved. After requesting budget to outsource the data center for 3 years, sometimes it's just that the budget gets approved and it's time to make the move.
Yeah.
So, high availability, really I would say the primary driver of moving into a data center facility. Uptime matters to everybody now. You walk into your dry cleaner these days even, and if his computer's down, there's a good chance he can't find your shirts or even take your shirts in. There's not many manual backups anymore. So customer expectations these days are high. Your customers expect your systems to be up and running, especially your customer-facing ones. Nobody can stand downtime anymore. There's more real-time needs in the business for customer service. And the ability to recover from a breach or ransomware or some other unforeseen problem drives data center usage significantly.
I think another point that's important in there is this perception that if my data center is right next to me, right, it's secure, and that's I think often a really bad assumption to make. You spend your time focusing on this infrastructure, but then you also spend an enormous amount of time probably running your business. And so you're just not giving that data center the attention it needs to be secure and stable and resilient and all those things. And so I think to add to that, a lot of people move their data centers to colo space to help bolster that. So I think that's important to know. Like that's their full-time job all day, every day, 24 hours a day is to monitor and maintain the health of that infrastructure.
Perfect segue into the compliance requirements section. I mean, not only is the government interested in making sure that you adhere to appropriate rules to protect private data and to make sure that you're not lying about your business, but the industry is doing that as well. I mean, if you're taking payment card information, there's an expectation that you're meeting a very stringent set of rules. Data centers normally solve the physical security and physical compliance component of those rules, and then the company themselves has to solve kind of the logical, and that's where you help out as well, I know. Again, a lot of these compliance requirements now are being vendor or client driven. So even though you may not be in the healthcare business, your healthcare clients may ask you to meet the same standards, even if you're not managing private data like patient data.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm working with several clients right now who, they're a logistics company, but some of the materials that they move are for healthcare, and those clients are demanding that they make their infrastructure HIPAA compliant now. They don't even store the PII or the personal identifiable information that's the criteria for HIPAA, but because they transport it, they now fall under that same umbrella.
It's very true. So those are the main change events, I would say.
Yeah, good summary. So when you're looking for a data center move, then what do you look for in a good data center as an option?
High availability. We come back to that. It's surprising, I think, to most clients when they actually study this, and it takes study. The expectation for a lot of folks is, okay, there's 3 data centers in town, they're all about the same. You really need to take a close look. You need to understand and count the number of power companies that are servicing the data center, the number of substations, the number of external power feeds, the number of internal power feeds, the number of UPS systems, the number of generators, all right down to your rack, the rack that holds your equipment. You would be surprised how many data centers don't have two of everything when it comes down to this. And that's how you protect against an outage, is your expectation is that at some point, at least one of those devices is going to fail. Not only that, chances are multiple of single devices are going to fail. You know how it is, it's Murphy.
So looking for the single point of failures is critical. Do data centers tend to share that? Are they willing to open the hood and share that information?
They absolutely should. I mean, if they're not willing to tell you what their infrastructure looks like or show you, even better, then you should be extremely wary if uptime's important to you. Air conditioning, same way. What happens if air conditioning units go down? How many can they lose without your equipment heating up to a point where it fails? And that just takes a matter of minutes in most data centers. And is the equipment standardized across? If this is a multi-location data center facility, do they standardize on equipment, and are they using standard equipment? Is probably the bigger question. Is this brand name generators and brand name UPSs, not
homegrown?
Refurb or homegrown devices? How supportable is it, and how easy is it to fix when there's a failure? All questions that revolve around availability. These are critical questions to ask. Locations and connectivity. Most clients like to have their data fairly close. You mentioned having the mop closet that's right next to your office as the primary data center in times past. Most of our clients have offices within about 80 miles of one of our 11 data centers. Mm-hmm. There's still some server hugging going on. There's still some comfort in that, although practically speaking, there's not a lot of reason to have that anymore. There's every now and then there's some latency issues.
Yeah, there's some good relationship, I think, building that comes from that as well. So having a data center option that has a good kind of presence and to allow you to build some of those personal relationships, I think, is important.
I'd say being able to go choke a throat locally
yeah.
Is a pretty nice thing. And having human relationships, a lot of the hyperscale clouds these days, people who are using cloud computing, they really don't have human beings they can talk to when they've got an issue. And that can often be a problem. It depends on your risk profile and how you do business, but having local throats to choke is good. Are multiple locations important to you? Most of our clients these days have data in one facility and then backup data in a second facility. And how are those connected? I mean, is that connectivity on your dime, on the client's dime, or is it on the service provider's dime to get data from one location to the other? And how diverse is the geographic locations? Are they 10 miles away? Are they 2 time zones away? And what's your consideration? Most of the regulations don't stipulate. So it's almost a religious issue on how far 2 data centers should be apart from each other. And there's all sorts of beliefs. There's beliefs all across the map. Practically speaking, about a half a day's drive seems to be where most people consider close enough that it's not expensive to go visit, but far enough away that a regional event wouldn't affect it. So that's locations and connectivity. Continuum of services, I think, is important now to a lot of clients. A lot of folks adopted colo in the last 10 years, using an external data center. Co-location facility is the same terminology. High-tech landlord is another name for a co-location. But oftentimes they are considering, what will IT look like in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Does your provider offer cloud infrastructure services? Do they offer the ability to patch and monitor your servers so that you don't necessarily have to do that kind of low value tactical work that's important, but is not necessarily where you want your IT people to spend your time? Do they have disaster recovery services to automate one of the most difficult and expensive processes that most IT companies do? You may not need any of these, but you may consider, as times change and as years 2, 3, and 4 go by, that these are services you're interested in. Does it make sense to move a data center at that time, or maybe consider the continuum of services up front as you're selecting your data center facility. Connectivity is also a key point in this continuum of services. If you're going to be multi-clouded, which most of our clients are, they have a little bit of Azure, they have a little bit of AWS, they might have a half a dozen software as a service applications. Can your service provider offer meaningful, low latency, low trouble connectivity to these other clouds as well as your co-location facility? And can they manage connectivity from the home office of the company back to the data center if you want them to do so? So continuum of services is more important. We see a lot of clients who are saying, well, we'll buy hardware one more time and then maybe we'll consider cloud next time around. Team qualifications. How good are the people? I mean, are they minimum wage people who are minding the store at 2 in the morning when they're sleepy? Are they just going to have to call somebody else to come in? Who manages the critical facilities? Are those employees? Are they third-party contractors? Are they a service provider to the data center that has to be called in and maybe means another hour or two of downtime if there's a critical error inside? And who's performing remote hands? The people who are in the NOC or who are in the data center on staff, what sort of training do they have? Were they working at McDonald's last week, or is there some sort of a training program to keep them IT savvy?
I think that point's been really helpful for us. You know, we do of course a lot of client managed services, and while at 3 in the morning we're happy to give our point of contact a call and go to their office and plug or unplug the system that's down right now. Having a live 24/7 knock that we can call with qualified folks, it makes our job a heck of a lot easier, and then we don't make our clients mad at 3 in the morning. So.
Well, it's true. And how many are on staff at 3 in the morning is the other question. I mean, is it one? And if he's busy or she's busy, I mean, are you queued up and waiting in line? Those are important questions. Security and compliance. We've talked a little bit about this. Who's allowed in the facility? How many other data centers clients can get near your equipment? What kind is it escort only? Can anybody who's a client walk in there at any time of the day? Does the provider routinely pass audits for your compliance requirements, specifically like HIPAA or PCI or HITRUST? And is the facility audit ready? And do audits cost? Do you have to spend extra when an audit comes through, or for the security reports? SOC 2 is a common report that we give out when people are doing their security audits. Is that extra money, or is it just part of the package?
That's not something I'd heard before, actually. That's a really good question.
It's surprising how many companies do charge for it. Finally, financial considerations. I think most people miss this. I think now that the business is more involved in these decisions, it's getting a little clearer. But I mean, the questions are: who owns the data center? Is it privately owned? Is it publicly held? Is it a private equity firm that's looking for quick returns and a spin out? How many times have they been bought and sold over the last couple of years? Understand the nature of the company that you're working with. How does ownership view the business? Is it a near-term money machine, or is it a long-term customer service play that they're trying to focus on for profitability? What's their debt load? How financially stable are they? Are they up to their eyeballs in debt? Most data centers are, quite honestly. It's very rare to find a company that's debt-free and pays cash for their data centers and pays cash for their cloud equipment if they're doing cloud infrastructure. And I mentioned the merger and acquisition company of the history is important. And of course, cost of the services to you, the end user, are going to come into play. But remember, that's probably the least important choice. Depending on what your future looks like, it is a single decision point out of many. So I think those are the real keys to look for in a data center. There's some other features too. Cleanliness, if they can't keep the floors swept, what does their operational model look like?
Sure.
Some of those decision points are more important than others, but I think that hits the high spots.
Great, awesome insights. Considering that, how do you make this all happen, right? I mean, that sounds like a lot. What we start off with here is, recognize that this type of work is rare for a lot of folks. So when you start talking about data centers and data center migrations, from an internal standpoint, they may do this once every 5 or 6 years. It is just not a common task that happens for one organization. So finding the right partner, right, that knows the ins and outs of kind of the data center options, the different strategies involved, has a project management process in place, and enough staff to do the work, right? Because this is a ton of work sometimes. I think that's kind of step one here. Recognize that you need a partner for this. 2, you got to decide, what you're going to move, right? Not everybody moves everything. I think, Doug, you alluded to this earlier, right? That with the continuum of services, maybe you just want to push some of your disaster recovery and backup into, you want to split that up into another data center to build some business continuity in what you have going on. So you got to really decide what you want to move, and that starts with knowing what you have. Looking internally can often be a lot harder than it seems. Folks will gloss over what they have. They'll forget why things are what they are. They forget the technology that they put in place because it just operates on a daily basis. You start making assumptions about what you have, and with this kind of work, assumptions are one of the most dangerous things that can happen, right? It can completely derail the entire project if it's a poor assumption anyways. So step 3, so once you found a partner, they've helped you identify what you have and what needs to migrate, then you got to plan the thing. And when you look at the time investment in this whole process, the plan is the biggest chunk of it, even greater so than the move itself, right?
Easily.
The move is often a blink of an eye. It's done in a day. Like if you've done all your planning right, you flip the switch and it's done. So plan the whole thing from start to finish. Go deep. You got to get really deep into the details, much further than you think. Again, one of the common mistakes here that folks will make is that they can figure it out as they go. They'll deal with the problems as they arise. And while there will be some of that, there's always going to be the unknowns, the gotchas that are going to pop up. Having a plan for those is what I'm talking about, right? So of course you're going to have the plan for the stuff that goes right, and that's going to go well. But having a plan for the stuff that you're not expecting is just as important.
The exit strategies are a critical part of that plan.
Yeah.
Being able to back out if you run into trouble. This is where technical debt, this is where the sins of the past show up. So having exit strategies along the way, that's probably the most valuable component of having an expert like KSM Consulting help with a plan.
And I think what's important there is that these are the systems that run your business, right? And so having involvement from the leadership team, not just the technical team, is critical. Everyone's going to kind of weigh in and make this type of decision. Every second of downtime or outage during these types of migrations is business productivity lost. So yeah, definitely find a right partner, decide what to move, and plan the thing as detailed as you can. Like I said, the smallest portion of this project is the move, right? Do the work. It should be easy if you planned it out. If you did your due diligence, it should just be that easy. And at the end of it, to your point, have an exit strategy, test it again, right? And a common mistake here is the IT department will handle the testing, and there's a certain amount of testing that your IT department can contribute to, but they can't go deep enough, generally speaking, into the kind of the full business stack. So identify champions in the organization that can come in and be part of that process. Test all the different portions of business flow, right? Data in all the way to data out, order entry all the way to invoice, however you want to phrase it. The last thing I'll mention here is document the heck out of what you do. Maintaining and troubleshooting these solutions long term is dependent upon that, right? And while these systems are getting simpler to manage on the front end, they're more difficult to implement and set up on the back end. And so having the documentation available and accurate to troubleshoot those systems is pretty important.
Couldn't agree more. And I think the case study you're about to talk about is really going to illustrate how that works.
Absolutely. So We've added just to the slide deck, kind of a little readiness checklist for your consideration. So, if you're thinking about a data center move, right, and you should be, this is the time to do it, right? Most folks are going through their 2019 strategy planning right now. This is the time to start thinking about this stuff. And here's kind of a quick checklist to let you know if you're ready, right? Do you know all your applications? Do you know what kind of databases they are? Do you know where it's at? Is it in your mop closet, or is it is it in a room down the hall? Do you have any application migration plans in the near future? Any updates plans from the business side, right? Where do I'd start identifying all the places where your employees work. Start thinking about downtime and recovery, meaning how long can your business tolerate an outage, right? Is it an hour? Is it 2 hours? Is it 2 days? That's important to articulate. You need to, if you've got growth plans planned for 2019, you need to be talking about those now with your IT team. Can the technology support that growth? The acquisition that Doug had mentioned earlier, are you buying up all sorts of smaller entities, and maybe they have a data center that's better than yours? Maybe if you buy an entity, you need to move your data center into theirs. Who knows, right? So make sure you have a plan for that. From the technology side itself, right? Make sure what is your network health? Like, how old's the hardware? Do you have ups and downs? Do you have what we would call a next-gen network in place? Next-gen networks are fairly critical to connecting to the newer and bigger data centers of the world. Your internet contracts. This is a place that people often forget about. What kind of connectivity? Again, Doug mentioned this earlier. This stuff is critical to getting your users access to the data center. And a lot of these contracts are old and legacy and need up to date. And then check your hardware life cycle. If you're up for a renewal, if your IT department's saying, hey, we need new servers this year, be on the lookout for those things as you're doing your planning next year. It could be a time to think about a data center move. We got a few minutes left here. The last part of this, I really just kind of to walk through one of our client stories here, and it's a client near and dear to us, right? Our parent company, Cat Sapper Miller. They ran into everything that we talked about earlier, right? They're a fairly old entity, 76 years old this year. They've got 400 employees plus, and growing, every day nationwide. They've got offices now in Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, New York, Oklahoma. Right? They have a high uptime demand during the busy season, right? During tax season. They have a high need for security. They had a high need for performance. Like, if you go back through our checklists from before, right? They met half a dozen of the criteria required for, like, hey, is our data center in the right place? So for them, right, some of the key decisions, right, some of those key decisions were their infrastructure was at the end of life. Their servers were approaching 5 years old, and they wanted to make sure they had a plan. They were asking about this 6 months ahead of time, right? So they're planning. The growth of the organization had increased, right? They had expanded out of Indianapolis into three additional offices. They had a need there in their data center, their current in-house data center. There was a water pipe up in the same room as the data center, right? There was a physical risk that they were trying to mitigate to their uptime. The building didn't have generator power, right? It was something that the building didn't offer, and they needed someone else to handle that. And another part of that I don't think we mentioned earlier, but they wanted to refocus some of their internal employees, and I see this a lot as well, where they want their internal employees to focus on the value add portion of the technology stack, rather than kind of the underlying technology or platform that it all runs on. So they were shifting some of their employees to work on more value add tasks inside the organization. So the process for them, if you go back to my process slide up above, right? So the first thing they did was they recognized that their team was inexperienced in this. And they reached out to us and said, hey, you guys do this all the time. Can you help us think through this? Absolutely, of course we will. We spent 4 months with them doing that assessment, right? What do they have? What does it do? Where's it at? And they're, a small and medium-sized organization. Think about how long it would take for an organization twice that size, right? So we spent a lot of time in this. We spent an additional amount of time into the plan, right? We talked about if you plan it right, the migration portion of it is easy. So we spent, I would say 2 months, maybe a little light, but at least 2 months planning the migration, piloting certain aspects of the solution. And ultimately we ended up moving the data center. Like, it all came back to, we did the assessment, we built the plan, it made a lot of sense, we moved the data center. Of course, at the end, tons and tons and tons of testing, and to Doug's point earlier, right? We had to exit one of our phases, right? One of the applications in particular, right? When we got through testing, did not perform as desired. So we shifted it back, right? We refined the plan. We moved forward. It's one of those kind of unknown gotchas that we had no way to identify, but we had a plan for it, and we rolled it back, and the users were none the wiser for it.
Yeah, the best move is one they can't tell, right?
Yeah. The solution here, it was in this case a move to Expedient. They actually they did that continuum of services that Doug had mentioned earlier. So they originally used the Expedient data centers here in town in Indianapolis for a disaster recovery solution. So they turned down their in-house disaster recovery and positioned that in Expedient. Once they were comfortable with that process, they ultimately flipped over their production into Indianapolis, and then they spun up an Expedient DR solution down in their Memphis location, right? That gets them that physical geo separation of their data now. So, and again, tested like crazy. We've turned it on both the Indianapolis side and the Memphis side, and it works seamlessly. They ended up hiring us to do the work. So they hired us to do the assessment and the plan, and then they of course asked us to turn around and do the execution of the work as well. We were happy to do that. Anything else? So the last slide here is just a quote, from the KSM team. Of course, they love us. Daryl said specifically, they're completely satisfied with their decision. Expedient in this case, their support was top notch. That was critical for them. They wanted a great relationship, and they got one. Response time, amazing. Support, amazing. Communication's always open. Yeah, we all had a pretty great experience with the Expedient solution. I think that's the end of our deck. A couple big takeaways, I think, as you walk away from this session today, is, for me anyways, is one, have that plan and make it early. Get involved. It can be, like I said, it can be anywhere from 3 months to a year of process start to end to get a data center moved, and having that plan is key. Number two, and I talked about this a little bit, but connectivity, I think, the network itself, it's key to moving a data center. So make sure that you spend the time and money building that next gen solution. I've got another webinar that talks about this a little bit more if you're curious what next gen network means. So hit the link if you're interested. For you, Doug, what were your big takeaways?
I think three points that I think would be best to keep in mind as you're considering moving data center. What's the easiest thing to compare on? It's cost. What is probably the riskiest point to make the decision on? It's probably cost. Mm-hmm. You've got to know what the availability model looks like. You've got to make sure that this solution is going to support your decisions 2 or 3 years down the road. It's hard to estimate or forecast what the business is going to look like. If you're in a high velocity business that's doing mergers and acquisitions, that continuum of services becomes key. What we find is the decision points when we ask clients a year after they've moved in, what's important to you now that wasn't important to you a year ago, and cost is often the first thing that they say. We're glad we moved in with you because you've given us the support we need and you've allowed us to grow and change. Second, consider the business case of the company in your decision. What I mean by that is not only make sure that you're well aligned with your internal business case, that you're trying to drive availability and trying to simplify IT by moving the data center out of the building, but make sure that you understand how the service provider fits both to your culture and to reducing risk. If your data center is publicly held and you're a small fish in a big pond, you may not get the service that you're looking for, even though the cost might be right. If you are in a company that's been bought and sold 3 or 4 times from a data center perspective, do you feel like you're going to get the service, or do you feel like you're carrying more risk as staffing and ownership changes? What's their culture? Are they big? Does it match up well with yours? If you're really hands-off, maybe a data center that's hands-off is good. If you like to work together with your consultants and your internal IT staff and your data center provider to make better decisions, it may be better to go with a local throat to choke and a local high-touch provider. Finally, get some help. Find a KSM consulting that can help you define the details. Measure twice, cut once is the old carpentry metaphor. If you don't plan a move out right, even in small environments, technical debt will come find you and give you all sorts of trouble. Hard-coded IP addresses happens all the time. Operating system and interdependencies among servers happen all the time. Strange networking problems that nobody has thought about for 10 years because that person left and was the 3 systems administrators ago. It all happens. So this must be planned out. The surprising bottlenecks are actually telecom. Telecom lead times can be 90 days, 120 days, or even longer, depending on your locations. So get some help and make sure you plan this thing right to go. And I would highly recommend KSM Consulting for help like this. We have worked with them on a variety of occasions, not only KSM, but with a number of other clients as well. Their professionalism and skill sets really lend themselves well to making these data center moves. I appreciate you including me on this webinar.
Yeah, thanks for coming to hang out with us. If you're in the Indianapolis area, you know it's frozen outside, and Doug had to make a trek to come hang out with us. If you're not in the Indianapolis area right now, I'm a little jealous, but.
You know, I think, Ryan, that we are about to the end of our time today. You guys did a really thorough job explaining all of this, and I thank you so much. For everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for your time. We will be sending a recording of the webinar to you today or tomorrow, as well as a survey. So just make sure that you tell us what you thought of today's webinar and ways that we can improve in the future. Additionally, we'll be sharing some more information about our client story, our case study with Kat Sapper and Miller, in case you're curious about how that went. So thank you all for your time, and thank you, Ryan and Doug, for all of your insights and knowledge.
Thank you.
Thanks.